What's up guys, welcome back. This is Anime Fiction. You'll be watching What If Naruto Became the Boss of Bikini Bottom Part 5. Now, let's begin. The logistical hurdle of a terrestrial brick-and-mortar establishment is the vertical supply chain, Sandy Cheeks stated, her Texas drawl ringing through the Level 1 vault. She stood in front of the holographic projector, which showed a 3D wireframe of the large wooden pier that extended from the human beach out into the ocean. A massive, multi-level building lay at the pier's extreme end. "We cannot rely on Node Epsilon for daily resupply," Sandy said, tapping her tablet. "The amphibious vehicle is too visible for continuous cargo runs. If we are to process thousands of persons each day, we require a permanent, high-velocity conduit from the Sector 4 manufacturing hub to the surface." Naruto Uzumaki directed the chief engineer to provide the architectural solution. Sandy smiled and zoomed in on one of the giant wooden pylons supporting the human boardwalk, calling it the pneumatic umbilical. "Plankton's drones will create a micro-tunnel in the bedrock beneath the pier. We run a pressurized, titanium-reinforced vacuum tube up the inside of the wooden pylon, completely bypassing the water column. It will connect the subterranean factory to the terrestrial restaurant's walk-in freezer. A localized teleportation jutsu for fast food," Naruto expertly evaluated, converting the engineering into shinobi terms. "The patties and proprietary sauce will be blasted up the tube at terminal velocity and arrive completely preserved on the surface grills." "Exactly," Plankton said, hovering close the hologram. Karen computed the vacuum pressure. "We can launch a payload of 10,000 burgers to the surface in under 4 minutes. This is a closed-loop monopoly, boss. Humans won't even realize the food is coming from the bottom of the ocean." "The infrastructure is sound," Naruto said, fixing his neat red tie. "Initiate the buyout protocol." High above the Pacific Ocean, the afternoon sun scorched the wooden planks of the Santa Monica-style boardwalk. At the other end of the pier stood the Salty Pelican, a huge, 2-story seafood restaurant that had seen better days. The paint was peeling, the neon sign beeped intermittently, and the dining area was completely vacant. Inside the manager's office, Arthur Pendleton, a stressed-out terrestrial businessman in a rumpled suit, stared at a stack of overdue bank notices. His family had operated the restaurant for 3 generations, but tourist foot traffic had virtually vanished. He was 1 week away from complete foreclosure. The bell over the entrance door chimed. Arthur moaned and rubbed his face. "We're closed for lunch, come back for dinner," he yelled through the opened office door. Nobody responded. But Arthur heard a peculiar, repetitive squeaking sound coming down the hall. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Arthur grimaced and stood up, leaving his office. In the midst of his empty dining room stood a brilliant yellow, perfectly rectangular mascot wearing a white fry cook's hat, a white shirt, and a red tie. The garment looked stunningly lifelike. The sponge-like texture appeared to absorb the sunlight coming through the windows. Arthur blinked. May I assist you, pal? The amusement park is located further down the pier. Are you lost?" Naruto Uzumaki's blue gaze fixed onto the human within the temperature-controlled, small hydrosuit. He used the same cold, calculating aura that had broken Squilliam Fancyson, but scaled it up to fit the terrestrial mammal. "You are Arthur Pendleton," Naruto said. His squeaky voice resonated across the empty diner, bearing weight that contrasted his ludicrous appearance. "Your business is operating at a deadly loss. You owe the terrestrial banking syndicate $400,000 by Friday." Arthur took a step back, his heart racing against his ribs. The mascot was not telling a joke. The mascot held his bank ledgers. Who are you?" Arthur inquired. "Is this a prank? How did you know about my loans?" "I'm the CEO of the Conch Street Syndicate," Naruto deadpanned, tucking his yellow, 4-fingered hands behind his back. "And I'm not here to pull a hoax. I am here to carry out a hostile corporate buyout." Naruto reaches into his square pocket. He didn't take out a spatula. He pulled out a sleek, black, waterproof briefcase and set it on the nearest dining table. He released the locks. Click. Click. Naruto lifted the lid, displaying rows of spotless, tightly rubber-banded stacks of $100 bills. $800,000, he announced, his voice flat and unyielding. "Double the amount of your current debt. Untraceable, non-sequential liquid capital. I am purchasing the building's deed, operational licenses, and exclusive rights to this precise dock position." Arthur stared at the briefcase. His brain feverishly attempted to rationalize the situation. It's a viral marketing campaign, asterisk, he realized hurriedly. An eccentric millionaire from a large fast food corporation is donning a sponge suit to purchase my restaurant for a reality TV show. You want to buy the salty pelican? Was the only reasonable explanation available to his mind. Arthur muttered as he reached out to touch one of the stacks of cash. Naruto expressed no interest in pelicans, salty or otherwise. I'm acquiring the geographic choke point. You shall accept this capital, settle your terrestrial bills, and leave the premises immediately. Arthur examined the silly yellow thing. He gazed at the mountain of riches that would instantaneously fix every single problem in his life. He didn't care whether it was a reality show, a cartel, or a fever dream. Arthur dashed back to his office, snatched the restaurant deed from his safe, and frantically signed his name at the bottom. He ran back and placed the paper into the sponge's four-fingered palm. It's yours. Arthur exhaled, slamming the briefcase shut and clutching it to his chest. The keys are on the register. Good luck with the pelicans, man. Arthur Pendleton dashed out of the restaurant, laughing madly, entirely handing over his family legacy to the warlord of Greece. Naruto stood alone in the quiet, bright dining room. He examined the dusty nautical decor, inefficient table arrangements, and archaic terrestrial kitchen equipment. He taps his lapel microphone and says, "Command." The terrestrial deed has been secured, Naruto said gently. Node Zeta is officially syndicate property. Asterisk. Excellent work, boss. Plankton's voice crackled. Asterisk. The sun is lowering over the surface. The boardwalk was closed to the public that night while the architectural renovation process began. Under the cover of darkness, the ocean just beneath the pier started boiling. Thousands of microscopic plasma drones, led by Sandy's faultless algorithms, rushed up the wooden pylons. They drilled stealthily through the salty pelican's flooring. Inside, there was a symphony of programmed destruction and reconstruction. The nautical ornamentation was flash incinerated. The walls were reinforced with white composite armor. A huge, ultra-efficient dual-lane kitchen was created, centered on a massive, custom-built flat-top grill. In the center of the walk-in freezer, the drones installed the end of the pneumatic umbilical, a heavy, titanium blast door connected directly to a high-pressure tube that plunged hundreds of feet straight down into the ocean floor, connecting the surface world to the Sector 4 manufacturing hub. By sunrise, the metamorphosis was complete. Naruto stood on the second-floor balcony of his new terrestrial stronghold, gazing out at the awakening human metropolis. The neon sign atop the building no longer reads the Salty Pelican. It blazed with a sharp, angry red light. Conch Street Syndicate. Node Zeta. The supply lines are primed, boss, Sandy stated through communications. We have a terrestrial stockpile of 100,000 patties and 500 gallons of syndicate gold waiting in the umbilical. The human consumer base is about to reach its maximum intake velocity. Naruto adjusted the red tie. His silent stalkers sat securely on the wooden planks of the surface world. Open the doors, Chief Engineer, Naruto said, his unblinking eyes observing the first early morning joggers pause and look at the vast, shining fast food castle that had appeared overnight. Let us see if the terrestrial economy can withstand the spatula Kata. Node Zeta is now officially open for business on the surface. The human world is soon to be inundated by syndicate gold. How should terrestrial consumers respond to the grand opening in Chapter 42? Should we see a frantic, Black Friday-style rush of hooked people, or should we cut to a boardroom of a big human fast food firm, such as McDonald's, whose earnings are suddenly plummeting? The California sun was out in force, pounding down on the Santa Monica boardwalk. But the heat was nothing compared to the vast, bedlam crowd waiting outside Node Zeta. The line was 3 miles long, looping down the pier, across the beach, spilling into city streets. It was a mad rush of Black Friday proportions, all of it driven by the deep chemical addiction to syndicate gold. The sheer kinetic volume of the operation was startling within the protected and sterilized kitchen of Node Zeta. Thunk hiss every 90 seconds the hefty titanium blast door of the pneumatic umbilical cycled, releasing a sealed payload of 500 flash-frozen patties and a 50-gallon pressurized keg of the amber sauce, up from the ocean below. Naruto Uzumaki was at the enormous, custom-built flat-top grill. He was no longer a fry cook. He was a variable in large-scale industrial manufacture. His yellow four-fingered hands were a complete blur, doing the spatula kata at speeds that defied terrestrial physics. He packaged, wrapped and sent combination meals at the pace of one every 1.2 seconds. Handfuls of crumpled currency were tossed into the automatic input slot by the humans at the extraction window, who grabbed their brown paper bags with quivering hands and wept for delight as they moved away to eat the proprietary substance. Way down in the deep, in the Level 1 command center, Sheldon J. Plankton was watching the inflow of earthly currency. "Boss, the volume is astronomical," Plankton exclaimed, his one red eye fixed to the quickly rising computer ticker. "We're doing $120,000 an hour. The local terrestrial economy is totally unstable. People are draining their bank accounts for sauce to dip in." "Hold the umbilical pressure," Naruto deadpanned over the communications, flipping 30 burgers with ease, all at once. "The human consumer is impulsive but possesses large reservoirs of liquid currency. We shall drain the zone. But an economic vacuum of that size does not exist in a vacuum." 2,000 miles away, in a vast glass and steel building overlooking the Chicago skyline, the earthly corporate backlash was beginning. This was the global headquarters of Sovereign Burger, the greatest fast food corporation on the planet. They had 40,000 locations around the world. They had politicians. They ruled world agriculture. In the executive boardroom on the top level, CEO Richard Sovereign sat at the head of a vast mahogany table. He was a vicious silver-haired man in a $10,000 suit. He did not seem happy. Behind him, a huge computer screen displayed a heat map of sales throughout North America. The whole west coast of the United States was a disastrous crimson blaze. "I want an explanation, and I want it now," Richard Sovereign said, his voice echoing in the hushed chamber. "And we've had a 40% drop in regional sales in the state of California in 72 hours. Did people stop eating?" A senior data analyst rose up and was afraid. He pushed a button on his remote. The map vanished, replaced by drone footage high overhead of the Santa Monica boardwalk. "They're still eating, sir," the analyst gulped hard. "They have simply relocated to this end." The camera zoomed up on the shiny white composite armor of Node Zeta. The huge, winding queue of desperate humanity was obvious. Richard laughed. He hit the table with his fist. "So you're saying one shack on the boardwalk is stealing $1 billion market share?" "It's not a pop-up, sir," the analyst corrected, pulling up a dossier. "They're operating under the Shell Corporation, Conch Street Syndicate LLC. They used highly sophisticated cyber warfare and aggressive bribes to evade all municipal health and zoning rules overnight. But that's not the scary part." The analyst clicked onto the next slide. It was a close-up infrared photograph of Naruto Uzumaki working the grill via the window. "Our recon teams are telling us this is a man in an animatronic mascot suit, we believe," said the analyst. "Thermal imaging, however, indicates a minuscule liquid-cooled exoskeleton that pumps highly pressurized fluid through the cellular structure of the suit. Furthermore, our logistics department is unable to track their supply routes. No trucks for deliveries. No warehouse. The food just shows up in the building." Richard Sovereign narrowed his eyes. "And the product? Our chemists have had a look at this." The analyst nodded, pulling up a sophisticated chemical analysis of the Asterisk Syndicate gold. "We managed to get a sample, sir. It's unprecedented," the analyst muttered, a true amazement coming into his voice. "The sodium matrix is just right. It has a confined thermal signature that does not dissipate. It causes the release of almost narcotic levels of dopamine in the human brain. If they choose to franchise this outside of California, Sovereign Burger will go bankrupt in 6 months." The boardroom fell silent. The CEOs stared at each other in pure, existential fear. They were the top predators of the terrestrial fast food chain, and an alien, highly optimized variable had just entered their ecology. Richard Sovereign sprang to his feet. He buttoned his suit jacket, his visage a mask of icy corporate wrath. Richard said, "Nobody out-monopolizes Sovereign Burger. I don't care whether they have cyber warfare or liquid-cooled mascots. They're on our turf. Send in the fixers." The execs gasped. The fixers weren't lawyers. They were a heavily armed, top-secret corporate mercenary section Sovereign Burger used to crush overseas market challenges with extreme prejudice. "Close the boardwalk," said Richard. "Set fire to the building to the waterline. Fetch me the recipe for that sauce." Back inside Node Zeta, The afternoon bustle was starting to subside as the terrestrial sun sank toward the horizon. Naruto Uzumaki scraped the flat-top grill with meticulous precision, the spatula kata ensuring every minuscule particle of grease was neutralized. Suddenly a harsh, screeching alert blared in his earpiece. "Commander!" Plankton's voice shouted, but it was devoid of its customary megalomaniac tone. "Karen just intercepted an encrypted satellite message from Chicago. You have a large ground force of hostiles coming, corporate mercs armed to the teeth. They're going for Node Zeta." Naruto didn't even flinch, he didn't drop his spatula. He gazed out through the restaurant's reinforced glass window. The beach people were heading home, and the boardwalk was starting to clear. The perimeter was coming apart. "Let me know when they show up," Naruto said effortlessly. "They're coming in on stealth choppers, boss." "ETA is 10 minutes, Sandy cut in, her voice strained. "I'm sealing the pneumatic umbilical for the underground factory, but you're cut off up there. You've got to get out of here. Drop the blast shields and go into the ocean." "Negative, Chief Engineer," Naruto deadpanned, strolling away from the grill and moving into the dining room center. "If we leave the node, we show operational weakness to the human conglomerates. I'm not giving up the beachhead." He tapped at his wrist gauntlet. Beats the hydro suit shuddered fiercely. Naruto flipped the localized gravity plate from 1.0 G to a crushing 8.0 gigaseconds. His spongy body rapidly squeezed, the water in his cells crystallizing into solid, iron-like armor under his immaculate white shirt. He felt the density principle bear down, with crushing fear, into his bones. Naruto Uzumaki stepped toward the front double doors of Node Zeta. He pushed them open and stepped out onto the wooden planks of the terrestrial boardwalk, standing alone against the setting sun. "Let them come," Naruto said gently to himself, placing his hands behind his back. The terrestrial market is about to be restructured in a hostile fashion. The continuous, thunderous th-wump of twin-rotor stealth helicopters disrupted the tranquil crash of the Pacific surf. The Santa Monica boardwalk had been completely evacuated. The horrified visitors and surfers fled as soon as they saw the unmarked, matte black gunships descending from the lowering California sky. The two helicopters were hovering 50 feet above the wooden pier, their side doors open. Thick, hefty quick ropes were dropped on the planks. 20 of Sovereign Burger's best fixers fell down the ropes. They were enormous terrestrial mercenaries dressed in cutting-edge urban combat gear, wielding suppressed assault rifles and tactical breaching shotguns. They wore matte black helmets with blazing red visors, and their actions were coordinated and brutally efficient. They spread out, making a lethal tactical semicircle around the entrance to Node Zeta. Commander Gristle stepped out from the center of the formation. He was a scarred, broad-shouldered veteran of industrial espionage who had destroyed competitor supply systems on 3 continents. Gristle leveled his assault rifle, aiming squarely at the bright yellow, rectangular mascot standing casually in front of the restaurant's double doors. "Target acquired," Gristle said into his communications unit. He dropped his rifle slightly to confront the sponge. "Listen to me, whoever is in that suit. You've crossed the Sovereign Burger conglomerate. Step away from the doors, lie face down on the boards, and reveal the secret sauce recipe. If you do not comply, I will authorize lethal force." Naruto Uzumaki didn't raise his hand, he didn't strike the deck. Under the crushing 8.0 G localized density field, his silent stalkers pressed so hard into the wooden boardwalk that the sturdy oak planks groaned and splintered slightly under his weight. Naruto's hydro suit buzzed, keeping his compressed, iron-dense cellulose fully hydrated. "Lethal force is a variable predicated on the assumption of structural superiority," he said sarcastically across the dock. "Your assertion is mathematically incorrect. Please vacate my boardwalk." Gristle scoffed. Gristle instructed, "Light him up, not to quarrel with the mascot. Center mass." The first line of fixers squeezed their triggers. Bert. Dozens of high-velocity, armor-piercing terrestrial bullets ripped through the air, targeted squarely at Naruto's clean white shirt and scarlet tie. Plankton screamed in dread inside the underground Level 1 command center. Boss. Evasive maneuvers. They're using live ballistics." Naruto did not flee. The bullets hit his yellow, porous chest. Instead of shredding through cloth and flesh, The high-velocity shots collided with the Hokage's modified cellulose, which is hyper-compressed and water-dense. Naruto's body had an internal density of 8.0 gigaseconds, making it inherently harder than titanium but with the fluid shock-absorbing properties of the deep ocean. The bullets struck his white shirt with a series of dull, metallic thwacks, their kinetic force fully neutralized by impact. Flattened lead slugs fell down onto the wooden pier, clattering harmlessly on his shining black shoes. The mercenaries ceased fire. The smoke has cleared. Naruto Uzumaki remained completely still, his hands clasped behind his back. Naruto's suit remained wrinkle-free. Terrestrial ballistic weaponry relies on atmospheric velocity, he explained calmly, his blue eyes unblinking. Against deep-sea compression variables, it is entirely inefficient. Gristle's jaw sank below his visor. What's that suit composed of? Anti-tank rounds. Bring up the big ordnance. Counter-offensive initiated, Naruto mumbled. He didn't simply run. He used the asterisk Shunshin no jutsu. The body flicker. By rapidly touching his wrist gauntlet, he reduced his localized gravity from 8.0 gigaseconds to 0.1 gigaseconds for exactly a tenth of a second, propelling himself forward with zero mass before instantly reappearing in the midst of the mercenary formation and slamming the gravity back up to 8.0 gigaseconds. To the naked view, the yellow fry cook vanished and teleported into their ranks with a thunderous boom that buckled the pier beneath them. "He's inside the perimeter," exclaimed a mercenary, swinging his gun like a club. Naruto dodged the strike with perfect, mechanical precision. He removed his wooden spatula from his square pocket. He didn't need to cut them, he simply needed to disrupt their operational capabilities. Spatula Kata. Kinetic disassembly. Naruto transformed into a localized yellow hurricane. He moved with the massive, crushing velocity like a wrecking ball, striking the mercenaries' weaponry and joints rather than their armored plates. The wooden spatula's flat edge broke assault guns into useless plastic and bent steel barrels to 90-degree angles. He struck a huge mercenary's chest with his open palm. The sheer transmitted density of the punch drove the 250-pound man flying 30 feet backward, crashing into a wooden churro stand. "Take him down." Hand to hand, Gristle yelled, pulling out a large tactical combat knife and lunging at the sponge. Naruto effortlessly sidestepped the blade. He lifted his spatula, seizing the mercenary commander's wrist. Naruto used a simple, mathematically precise application of torque to dislocate Gristle's wrist and send the combat knife whirling into the ocean. Before Gristle could scream, Naruto rammed his massive, yellow shoulder into the commander's chest. Gristle felt like he'd been hit by a freight train made of wet concrete. He was propelled backward, skidding across the wooden boards until his back collided brutally with the hovering stealth helicopter's landing gear. The engagement ended in exactly 42 seconds. 20 of Sovereign Burger's most elite and well-trained corporate assassins were groaning on the wharf floor. Their firearms had been destroyed. Their armor was cracked. They had been entirely disassembled by a fast food mascot holding a kitchen tool. Naruto stood in the middle of the devastation. He casually removed a white towel from his apron, cleaned a bit of dust from his spatula, and returned it to his pocket. He stepped slowly up to Commander Gristle, who was gasping for oxygen and grasping his dislocated wrist. Naruto leaned down, his blank blue eyes piercing directly into the mercenary's terrified soul. "You are an asset of the Sovereign Burger conglomerate," Naruto said calmly. "Why yes," Gristle wheezed, his bluster broken. "We're the fixers. We're supposed to fix the market." "You have simply identified your own obsolescence," Naruto corrected calmly. He reached into his pocket and retrieved a single, crushed, flattened bullet that had rebounded off his chest. He dropped it on Gristle's chest armor. "Deliver a message to your chief executive officer," Naruto said, his squeaky voice chilling the earthly air. "Inform Richard Sovereign that the Conch Street Syndicate has invaded the California coastline. If he tries to deploy more kinetic assets against my infrastructure, I won't wait for them on the beach. I will use my pneumatic umbilical to launch myself directly into his Chicago boardroom and conduct a hostile takeover of his whole worldwide supply chain." Gristle looked at the yellow demon and nodded wildly. I'll tell him. "Evacuate my pier," Naruto ordered, "you're disrupting the dinner rush." Naruto looked away from the broken mercenaries. He strolled casually back to Node Zeta's double doors, pushing them open and entering the sterilized, fully protected kitchen. He taps his lapel microphone and says, "Command. The terrestrial hostile force has been routed," Naruto stated. "There were 0 casualties. The perimeter is secured." Asterisk. "Holy sweet mother of pearl, boss," asterisk Sandy's voice whispered over the comms, having witnessed the entire incident via the external security cameras. Asterisk. "You just took on a PMC with a spatula and didn't even break a sweat." Asterisk. "Their tactics were linear. Their weapons were dependent on aspects I could control," Naruto observed, going up to the flat-top grill. "A message has been sent. The terrestrial conglomerates now recognize that we are a sovereign power." Naruto straightened his crimson tie, the hum of the pneumatic umbilical returning to life as the blast doors opened, preparing for the next supply of meat. The warlord of Greece gazed out the window as the stealth helicopters limped into the night sky, their tails between their rotors. The Pacific coastline was secure. The franchise was absolute. In the penthouse boardroom of Sovereign Burger's worldwide offices in Chicago, CEO Richard Sovereign gazed out over the terrestrial metropolis from the floor-to-ceiling glass. In his hand was a solitary bullet, of lead, flattened. Seated behind him at the mahogany table was Commander Gristle, arm in a thick medical sling. The veteran merc was absolutely shell-shocked. "I'm trying to determine what happened, Gristle," Richard Sovereign whispered in a low, menacing whisper. "You brought 20 of my best, most expensive corporate assets. You had air superiority, armor-piercing ballistics. And you tell me that a brightly colored, porous mascot bounced your bullets off its chest and tore your squad apart with a wooden cooking utensil." "It wasn't a mascot, sir," Gristle said, his voice hoarse and a little shiver running through him despite the climate-controlled chamber. "It was an apex predator. It could move fast enough to shatter the sound barrier. It could strike with the localized force of a wrecking ball. And it told me. It instructed me to tell you that if we attack again, it's going to teleport into this boardroom and seize your firm." Richard Sovereign turned slowly. He let the flattened bullet drop with a heavy clink on the mahogany table. "It believes it can threaten the sovereign conglomerate," Richard said, his eyes narrowing into cold, capitalist slits. "It thinks it has the beachhead, it has the battle. But every organism, terrestrial or marine, needs a supply line." Richard pressed a button on the console in the boardroom. The computerized screen burst to life showing a high-resolution sonar scan of the Santa Monica boardwalk. "Our Naval Intelligence Division did a deep scan of the pier," Richard said, tapping the screen. "Node Zeta doesn't have delivery trucks. But they did identify this. A vacuum tube, highly pressurized and reinforced with titanium, running straight down the middle of the wooden pylon, plummeting hundreds of feet into the ocean floor." Gristle blinked. "Pneumatic tube? They're shooting the burgers up from the bottom of the ocean?" "They're deeply dug in below the surface," Richard stated. "If we can't get into the restaurant, we cut the umbilical cord. When human consumers find out the proprietary sauce has run out, the riots will rip Node Zeta apart for us." Richard pushed the second button. "Send in the asterisk abyssal sovereign. I want that tube cut before midnight." All around the pneumatic umbilical, far below the surface, in the dark crushing waters of the Pacific, all was still. Suddenly the huge holographic radar in the Level 1 command center of the Conch Street Syndicate flared a vivid, throbbing crimson. Asterisk. "Commander. We have a massive sonar anomaly coming down from the terrestrial sector," asterisk screeched Sheldon J. Plankton, his single eye watching the massive blip on the screen. "A corporate deep-sea cutter. Heavily armored. It's got industrial plasma torches. They're making a direct run for the umbilical pipeline." Sandy Cheeks ran to the console, her fingers flying on the waterproof keyboard. "Plankton's right, boss," Sandy said in a Texas drawl that was taut with strain. "If they cut that titanium tube, the ocean pressure will flood the vacuum chamber. Node Zeta will lose its entire supply line and the factory below will suffer catastrophic water damage." Naruto Uzumaki was at the head of the bamboo table. He wasn't wearing the hydro suit, he was in his natural aquatic element. He saw the computer image of the submarine dive below. "The Earth CEO is attempting a siege. Cut the logistics and starve the outpost," Naruto evaluated perfectly, his squeaky voice showing no stress. "It's a textbook move. And very predictable." "Should I unleash the plasma drones?" Plankton shouted, his little fists hovering over the large red launch button. "Negative." Plasma disperses quickly in deep, high-pressure water. Naruto corrected him. You want to kill a seagoing vessel, you have to turn the sea into a weapon. Sandy, what is the current internal pressure of the pneumatic umbilical? It makes a near-perfect vacuum to shoot the payloads up at terminal velocity, Sandy said, examining a gauge. That tube's gonna suck like a vacuum cleaner, SpongeBob. If it blows, it's gonna suck 1,000,000 gallons of seawater in seconds. We're not going to let it breathe seawater, Naruto said deadpan. We shall draw the enemies into it. He turned to the little Cyclops. Plankton. Override the safety valves on the external maintenance hatch of the umbilical, exactly 50 feet above the ocean floor. When I give the signal you will open said hatch. Plankton gasped. Boss. If I open the hatch with the vacuum on, it'll create a localized singularity. The suction will be strong enough to turn a whale inside out. That's the tactical goal, Naruto confirmed. He straightened his crisp paper cap. I'm going out there. Naruto exited the vault and his silent stalkers carried him quickly to the airlock. Outside in the frigid pitch-black void, the Abyssal Sovereign slid silently towards the giant titanium tube that ran along the wooden pylon. The corporate submersible was black, sleek, and about the size of a city bus. Huge, bright blue plasma cutter arms extended from its nose. The captain looked at the target through the strengthened viewport of the sub. Target acquired. The captain called over the comms to Chicago. Engaging plasma cutters. We'll cut the syndicate's lifeline in 3, 2. Thud. The top of the submarine's hull was hit hard and locally. The captain leapt. His eyes flicked up to the sonar screen. There was a minuscule, square life form on top of the submarine. Outside, Naruto Uzumaki stood motionless on the enemy ship's gleaming, black metal. His scarlet tie was snapped around his porous neck by the deep ocean currents, but he stood steadfast. He lifted his right hand and thumped the side of the hull with the wooden handle of his spatula in a certain beat. It was a Morse code signal, bouncing through the water and right into the chum bucket mainframe. Message received. In the control room, Plankton pounded the override button with his fist. 50 feet from the sub, a large, heavy steel maintenance door on the side of the pneumatic umbilical broke open forcefully. The consequences were swift and disastrous. The tremendous artificial vacuum inside the tube fought the crushing pressure of the deep sea. It formed an instant, scary maelstrom, a confined vortex of pure, unmistakable suction, sucking millions of gallons of water straight into the dark hole. The Abyssal Sovereign got trapped in the event horizon. The sub grunted hugely as the current gripped it and started to tug it violently towards the open hatch. Captain. Our steering's gone. The helmsman yelled, fighting with the yokes. There's a huge pressure differential. It's sucking us in. Full reverse. Blow the ballast. The skipper yelled. Panic had taken hold of him. The motors of the submarine roared, churning the water in a desperate attempt to escape the vortex. But the syndicate's terrestrial engineering was no match for vacuum physics. The sub came closer and closer to the yawning, sucking hole in the titanium tube. Naruto stood on top of the floundering submarine. He didn't need to blow the sub up, he just had to grab it. He focused his kinetic energy. He flexed his knees, coiling his yellow squashy body like an industrial high-tension spring. Spatula Kata. Lotus down. Naruto dove straight down into the black water, changing direction immediately and hitting a perfect high-speed diving heel kick straight into the rear propeller shaft of the submarine. Crunch. The concentrated kinetic density transfer ripped the sub's primary drive shaft apart. The propellers ignited, then whined to a dead, abrupt stop. The Abyssal Sovereign was helpless, her engines dead, in the grip of the vortex. The bulk of the submarine was dragged backwards, the rear end crashing into the open maintenance hatch of the umbilical with severe force. The sub was too big to go all the way into the tube, but the force of the vacuum pushed the back half of the vessel neatly into the hole, closing it up like a giant cork. The vortex ceased in a second. The sea grew calm. The Abyssal Sovereign was wedged hopelessly and eternally into the side of the syndicate's supply line. Inside the sub, the emergency lights began to flicker on. The team was hurled to the floor, injured and scared but alive. We're wedged. The helmsman gasped, staring at the integrity monitors. The pressure's keeping us down. Can't escape. Naruto Uzumaki drifted down with grace, stopping right in front of the main viewport of the submarine. He put his hands behind his back. Through the thick glass he stared at the horrified captain. Naruto fished into his square pocket and produced a waterproof laminated business card, and he lifted it up to the glass. It read, Conch Street Syndicate Towing and Extraction Services. Hourly rate, $500,000. The captain gulped, looking into the deadpan, unblinking eyes of the warlord of Greece. Naruto pressed his lapel mic. Command. Hostile vessel neutralized and repurposed, Naruto reported easily. Basically the umbilical hatch is sealed off. Redirect Earth-bound payloads through bypass valve B. Copy that, Commander, Sandy exclaimed, applause coming over the comms. Supply line to node Zeta is secure. Intake velocity is returning to nominal levels. Plankton, Naruto said. Clear a direct, non-encrypted frequency to the boardroom of the Sovereign Burger in Chicago. A crackling burst of static told him the line was open, almost immediately. Richard Sovereign, Naruto's high-pitched voice blasted across the airwaves, penetrating right into the terrestrial boardroom thousands of miles distant. Your deep-sea asset is permanently out of commission. It is now a structural patch on my supply line. In Chicago, Richard Sovereign's knuckles were white as he grabbed the edge of his mahogany table. You listen to me, you corporate parasite, Richard began to snarl. I do not listen. I dictate, Naruto interrupted perfectly. You tried a siege. You lost. The California beachhead is safe for good. Tomorrow I'll start Phase 12. The syndicate will cross the Rockies. We're growing east. Give up your market share, Richard. Or I'll bury you in proprietary viscosity. Naruto cut the connection. He adjusted his white paper hat and turned his back to the confined submarine and swam back toward the bright, impenetrable fortress beneath Conch Street. The ocean belonged to him. It was his beach, and then the major continent of the Earth. Naruto has defeated Sovereign Burger's naval attack and is now going towards land. The stillness in the Pentagon briefing room was thick and total. Richard Sovereign was at the head of a polished oak table. The CEO of Sovereign Burger has totally dropped the business rivalry act. He was no longer a businessman. He was a scared land animal begging for government assistance. Around the table were 4 United States military generals and the Director of Homeland Security. The Santa Monica Pier glowed on the big monitor behind Richard and the thermal film of Naruto Uzumaki methodically taking out 20 top mercenaries. Gentlemen, I'm telling you this is not a fast food franchise, Richard Sovereign said, his voice taut with desperation. It's a well-organized, well-armed deep-sea insurgency. They have localized gravity manipulation, armor that can't be destroyed in the water, and a bioweapon disguised as proprietary dipping sauce. A 4-star Army general squinted at the bright yellow rectangle on the screen, leaning forward. Mr. Sovereign, you expect the United States military to wage war on a sponge wearing a red tie? The general remarked, his voice dripping with genuine suspicion. A mascot mugged you? That's a local police concern. It caught an armored submarine and stuffed a deep-sea vacuum tube with it. Richard slammed his fist on the table. First they annexed the Santa Monica boardwalk. Now they're draining the local economy at $100,000 an hour. By tomorrow they'll be over the Rocky Mountains. If you don't stop them, they'll have a monopoly over the entire North American continent, and they'll do it by chemically enslaving the populace with their umami profile. The Director of Homeland Security read through another file, the intercepted cyber warfare data that Plankton had used to acquire the beach. He's right about the cyber capabilities, the director said grimly. Whoever this Conch Street Syndicate is, they hacked our county firewalls in 3 seconds and legally bought the coastline with offshore shell accounts. Their logistics are frighteningly perfect. The general sighed, straightening his uniform. He didn't see the sponge as an alien threat, but an illegal entity on U.S. territory pushing back private military contractors constituted a breach of national security. The general stood up. Very well, he said. We're not going to declare war. We're going to impose a quarantine. I'm calling out the California National Guard. We're going to close down the Pacific Coast Highway. Nothing comes off that pier and nothing comes out of that ocean. Thousands of miles away, under the crushing weight of the Pacific, the Sector 4 manufacturing hub was working at a horrifying new scale. Syndicate gold was pouring out of the condiment vats by the 1,000 gallons. But the genuine engineering marvel was happening in the freshly dug, enormous underground loading dock. Proudly Sandy Cheeks stood before a fleet of 10 gigantic, matte black, fully armored 18-wheeler semi-trucks. "I got you the Syndicate Leviathan-class transport," Sandy said, slapping the reinforced titanium fender of the lead truck. "We can't run a pneumatic tube to every city in America, so we're going mobile with the supply lines." Naruto Uzumaki strolled casually down the line of giant cars. His unblinking blue eyes took in every structural feature. "Explain the terrestrial propulsion," Naruto said. "They use hybrid thermal pulse engines, boss," Sandy said, holding up her tablet. "They can operate on deep-sea currents, but when they come ashore they switch to a terrestrial combustion cycle fueled by the highly flammable runoff from our frying grease. They're totally self-sustaining. And the trailers have Plankton's localized gravity plating. Even if the truck flips, the payload is perfectly stable." Plankton drifted down from the ceiling, a little victory cigar clasped between his teeth. "And the best part, boss," Plankton grinned, "is that they are amphibious. They don't need a bridge. They can drive right on across the ocean floor and drive right up on the beach." "How much can it hold?" wondered Naruto. "Each trailer has 500,000 frozen patties and 10,000 gallons of the amber glaze," revealed Sandy. 10 of them is enough raw caloric capital to feed the whole West Coast for a month." Naruto nodded. The logistics structure was complete. The terrestrial expansion was no longer a hypothesis, it was a real armada. He snapped his wrist gauntlet and the miniature hydrosuit beneath his clothes came alive. He felt the familiar rush of oxygenated, pressured water filling his spongy cells. "This is an expansion the earthly government won't let go of without a fight," Naruto said flatly, peering up at the cavern's towering ceiling. "They keep their territorial borders with physical barriers and intimidation. We'll meet resistance." "Let 'em try," Sandy grinned savagely, playing with her air helmet. "You taking the wheel, Commander?" "I am the Vanguard," Naruto said. He strode over to the lead Leviathan-class transport, leapt up the side of the large armored cab with ease, and hauled the heavy steel door open. He slid into the driver's seat. "Node Epsilon drivers, get your vehicles ready," Naruto said over the Syndicate communications channel. The other 9 deeply indoctrinated operators donned red ties and stepped into the other 9 vehicles. They were former bouncers at the Salty Spittoon who had mastered the spatula kata and were now cross-trained in heavy terrestrial logistics. "Engines online," Naruto ordered. 10 huge thermal pulse engines screamed to life, shaking the bedrock of Bikini Bottom itself. "Open the main water gates," Naruto instructed. The big steel doors of the hangar grind open slowly to show the black crushing expanse of the deep ocean. Naruto pushed the heavy pneumatic shifter forward. The big black semi-truck roared out from the underground base, ignoring all the rules of aquatic buoyancy. Its huge treads gripped the ocean floor as it began the long, steep trip up the continental shelf toward California. The sun was just starting to come up over the Santa Monica beach on the surface. But it wasn't some quiet morning. The whole coastline was militarized. Dozens of desert camo Humvees and heavily armored personnel carriers sat parked in a huge blockage along the Pacific Coast Highway. 200 National Guard men waited behind concrete barriers. They held firmly their M4 carbines. A military megaphone crackled. "This coastline is under federal quarantine right now," a terrestrial captain shouted out at the empty ocean. "Any unauthorized vehicles attempting to breach the perimeter will be met with superior firepower." The sea stayed silent, then the water began to boil. A great unearthly wave broke on the coast. The troops gripped their guns more tightly in their hands, their eyes wide with surprise as the dark shapes in the water swelled. Rumble. The lead Syndicate Leviathan-class transport emerged from the surf. Water ran off its matte black titanium-strengthened armor. The huge earth tires bit into the damp sand and the engine roared with a scary, loud industrial howl. Behind it exploded 9 more huge semi-trucks out of the ocean, forming a perfect, unstoppable V formation on the beach. The Earth captain dropped his megaphone. Richard Sovereign had told them of a food truck. He hadn't mentioned anything about an armored logistics convoy that could drive on the ocean floor. The first truck didn't slow down. It drove up the beach, crushing a lifeguard tower under its huge wheels, and came to a halt precisely 10 feet away from the military's concrete barricades. The air brakes hissed, producing a large puff of pressured steam. The soldiers raised their rifles and pointed them at the cab of the big vehicle. The massive steel door swung open. Naruto Uzumaki appeared. Rather than going down the ladder, he simply dropped 15 feet to the concrete, his silent stalkers absorbing the impact nicely. He smoothed his crisp white paper hat, and clasped his hands behind his back. He stared at the 200 highly armed foot soldiers. He glanced at the Humvees. He gazed at the concrete barriers restricting his stream of supply. Naruto tapped the lapel microphone clipped to the truck's external loudspeakers. "You are blocking a federally registered supply chain right now." Naruto's deadpan, squeaky voice boomed across the Pacific Coast Highway with the weight of a Hokage. "The Conch Street Syndicate does not acknowledge your terrestrial quarantine. Disperse immediately or I will deem your barricade a logistical inefficiency and remove it." The lieutenant captain of the California National Guard stood behind a reinforced concrete wall, his radio pressed firmly to his ear. Sweat beaded on his forehead, irritating his eyes beneath his military helmet. He looked at the bright yellow, rectangular structure on the Pacific Coast Highway. "I repeat, the target is a mascot, command," the captain said anxiously on the radio. "It is escorted by 11 heavily armored but unidentified cargo vehicles. It has requested that we clear the quarantine zone." Asterisk. "Hold the line, Captain." Asterisk. The general's voice crackled back. Asterisk. "Do not let that convoy enter the interstate. If the entity advances, you are free to engage." Asterisk. The captain gulped hard. He observed the 200 heavily armed soldiers lining the barricades. He turned back to the sponge. Naruto Uzumaki checked the gold-plated diver's watch he had requisitioned from Inspector Dorsal's offshore accounts. "You have been granted 45 seconds to dismantle your barricade," Naruto projected through the external speakers of the lead Leviathan-class transport. "This delay is losing the syndicate an estimated $12,000 in planned revenue. I am moving forward." Naruto made a measured stride toward the barrier. "Fire warning shots," the captain yelled. A dozen troops squeezed the triggers. A barrage of 5.56mm rounds cut into the asphalt just in front of Naruto's shining black shoes, scattering gravel and grit into the salty ocean air. Naruto paused. Naruto stared down at the blazing holes in the pavement and then up at the troops. "A kinetic warning is only effective if the target fears the kinetic impact," he said softly. He tapped the wrist gauntlet. "Beast." He activated the 8.0G localized density field. The minuscule hydro suit beneath his crisp white shirt compressed quickly, transforming his spongy cellulose into absolute, iron-like solidity. He resumed walking. He did not run. He walked at the slow, scary, and inexorable pace of an expanding glacier. "The target is not complying. Fire for effect." The captain screamed, "Center mass," his voice cracked. The entire line of National Guardsmen opened fire. The thundering roar of 200 assault guns reverberated off the Santa Monica cliffs. A wall of lead smashed into the yellow fry cook. The bullets flattened against his clothing, like rains on a warship. Dozens, then hundreds, of smashed bullets cascaded from his body, crashing into a huge mound of lifeless metal on the pavement. The sheer kinetic power of the salvo would have forced a standard vehicle backward, but Naruto's artificially increased mass kept his silent stalkers securely planted on the ground. He walked directly through the barrage of bullets, stopping exactly 1 foot from the gigantic 3-ton concrete barricades that blocked the highway. The soldiers ceased firing. Their magazines were empty. The hush was broken only by the sound of smoking brass casings rolling across the street. The captain whispered, "Ceasefire," his eyes wide with existential horror. It's bulletproof." Naruto Uzumaki slowly reached inside his square pocket and pulled out his wooden spatula. "Your weapons are inadequate. Your barricades are a logistical impediment," Naruto observed. "I will now clear the road." Naruto did not attack any soldiers. The syndicate did not massacre civilians or state military troops, but it was bad for public relations and prompted government audits. He targeted the infrastructure. He raised his spatula. He did not swing it wildly. He focused his kinetic torque on determining the exact resonance frequency of the reinforced concrete. Tap. He used the wood's flat edge to strike the center of the huge barrier. The concrete held for a fraction of a second. Then a web of small fissures erupted on the surface. With a resounding, localized crack, the 3-ton barricade cracked into a million harmless, gravel-sized fragments, collapsing into the roadway like a sandcastle kicked by a giant. The soldiers screamed and scrambled backward as the wall disintegrated. Naruto did not stop. He used the *Shunshin no Jutsu, reducing his mass to 0.1 gigaseconds and blurring forward before reappearing exactly in front of the lead military Humvee positioned horizontally across the road. He lowered the spatula in a vertical, 90-degree spatula kata attack. The wooden blade slashed effortlessly through the Humvee's armored hood, tearing through the massive steel engine block like warm butter. He repeated the maneuver on the next 3 Humvees in under 2 seconds. Slice. 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 Oil and coolant immediately flowed onto the pavement. The engines hissed before dying. The vehicles were fully disabled, with no terrestrial casualties. Naruto stood amid the demolished military blockade. Naruto wiped a drop of coolant from his spatula and put it away. "Your vehicles have experienced sudden catastrophic engine failure," he declared deadpan to the horrified captain, who was sheltering behind a damaged tire. "Your barricade has been disassembled. The quarantine has been lifted." Naruto turned his back on the US military. He went casually back to his matte black Leviathan-class transport and easily climbed into the armored cab. He grabbed the heavy radio microphone. "Node Epsilon drivers. The road is obvious." 10 armored semi-trucks roared into action as they were directed to Interstate 15. They rumbled on, easily crushing the remaining concrete gravel beneath their gigantic treads and entirely avoiding the paralyzed National Guard. The vanguard of the Conch Street Syndicate moved onto the terrestrial roadway, their thermal pulse engines speeding as they turned their strengthened grills eastward into the Mojave Desert. Richard Sovereign sat in the Chicago boardroom and watched a live drone broadcast of the blockade's destruction. He didn't shout. He did not chuck the coffee mug. He simply stared at the computer, a cold, scary realization creeping into his business mind. Sovereign whispered, "The US military just allowed a convoy of food trucks to bypass a federal blockade." The senior logistics VP gasped, "Sir. The Pentagon refuses to escalate. They refer to the thing as a non-lethal, heavily armored civilian abnormality. They refuse to sanction drone strikes on US soil over a fast food turf dispute. We're on our own." Richard Sovereign's gray hair glowed under the boardroom lights. He placed his hands flat against the wood table. "If the state cannot protect its corporate citizens, the corporation will protect itself," Sovereign stated, his tone merciless. "Where is that convoy heading?" The VP tapped the iPad. "Based on their trajectory and speed on Interstate 15, they'll arrive in the Nevada desert by midnight. They're driving straight for Las Vegas, sir. The core of our Western distribution network." "Las Vegas is not just a distribution network," Sovereign retorted coldly. "This is a stronghold. If they wish to cross the Mojave, they must go along the I-15 corridor." Sovereign looked to a shadowy person lurking in the corner of the boardroom. The man wore a fitted gray suit, but his posture screamed specialist military experience. He was the leader of Sovereign Burger's Black Ops Logistics Division. "Deploy the dreadnoughts," Richard directed. The man in the gray suit nodded once. "All of them, sir," Richard confirmed. "I want to lock down the roadway. I want those black semi-trucks to drive off the road, flip, and burn in the desert. I want the yellow mascot hauled from the wreckage. We're not battling a restaurant anymore. We're fighting a rogue nation." The sun began to drop over the Mojave Desert, throwing long, bleeding shadows on the cracked, parched ground. Inside the cab of the lead Leviathan-class transport, Naruto Uzumaki drove with faultless mechanical accuracy. The hydrosuit hummed silently, perfectly isolating him from the harsh, residual terrestrial heat outside the protective glass. Behind him, 9 similar big black trucks formed an ideal, aerodynamic slipstream arrangement. Asterisk, Commander. Asterisk Plankton's voice echoed through the dashboard communications. Asterisk. We're reaching the Nevada border. The terrestrial terrain is rather exposed. No cover. Naruto gently said, I understand. There are no aquatic escape routes. Maintain velocity. The radar screen placed into the dashboard flashed bright red. Asterisk. Boss. Plankton exclaimed. Multiple high-velocity bogies are approaching from the rear and front. They aren't military. They're unregistered heavy transport vehicles. Asterisk Naruto checked his side mirrors. 5 gigantic, substantially modified terrestrial semi-trucks appeared from the heat shimmer behind them. They were painted a bright, powerful crimson red and featured Sovereign Burger's Golden Crown insignia. They were outfitted with large steel battering rams in the front grills and additional armor plating along the trailers. 5 more sovereign dreadnoughts approached from the front, driving the opposite direction down the vacant stretch of road, forming a highly coordinated, high-speed corporate pincer movement. "They intend to crush our logistics chain in the desert," Naruto stated calmly. He reached out to flip a series of red switches on the dashboard. The internal cabin lighting switched to a dark, tactical amber. "Node Epsilon drivers. Hostile terrestrial logistics intercepted," Naruto said over the encrypted syndicate line. His squeaky voice was chilly, completely calm, and menacing. "Disengage the terrestrial speed controls. Transfer the frying fat directly to the thermal pulse afterburners. Prepare for high-speed dynamic negotiations." The Mojave Desert was a jumble of crumbling asphalt, vegetation, and burning terrestrial heat. The high-speed corporate vehicular combat on Interstate 15 was nearing terminal velocity. The 10 matte black Syndicate Leviathan-class transports flew east at 90 miles an hour, in a perfect V formation. 5 sovereign dreadnoughts were fast approaching from behind. They were enormous, crimson-red semi-trucks, highly armored with steel plating and reinforced battering rams. 5 more, walking toward them, pushing against the flow of the vacant freeway. A high-speed, perfectly timed pincer movement to smash the Syndicate supply line into a tangled heap of blazing metal. Inside the lead sovereign dreadnought, the earthbound mercenary captain held tight to his steering wheel, eyes fixed on the black vehicle ahead of him. "Pincer actual to all units," the mercenary barked into his radio. "Target acquired. Ramming speed, full ahead. Run these mascots into the ground." The 5 sovereign trucks behind him came at 110 miles an hour now, gaining. Naruto Uzumaki's unblinking blue eyes scanned the rearward and forward radar screens inside the lead Syndicate transport. "Node Epsilon drivers," Naruto's squeaky deadpan voice crackled securely over the comms of the 10 Syndicate vehicles. "The hostile entities plan to conduct a kinetic transfer through rear collision. We'll use their momentum against them. On my mark, engage localized gravity plating at max density to your rear axles only." The crimson dreadnought of the mercenary commander crashed into the rear bumper of the Syndicate transport behind. He figured the black truck would fishtail, lose control and roll into the desert sand. Naruto instructed, "Mark. Beast." At the exact microsecond of impact, the Syndicate driver activated the plankton-engineered gravity plate. The back axle of the black vehicle jumped to 10.0 gigaseconds of localized density instantly. It was virtually an immovable 10,000-ton wall of hardened titanium. Smash crack. The crash had been completely destructive on Earth physics. The Syndicate truck didn't move an inch under the pounding ram of the Sovereign Dreadnought's huge steel beak. But the entire front end of the red truck folded inward. The engine block cracked, the hood tore clean off, and the windshield blew out. The Sovereign truck braked hard, tires squealing, and veered off the highway and rolled violently into a ditch in a cloud of smoke and sand. The identical kinematic catastrophe was repeated across the rear formation. The last 4 Sovereign trucks, still chasing, crashed into the now immovable Syndicate bumpers, destroying their own cars and hurtling off the road in chaotic spins. "Rear hostiles neutralized," one of the Syndicate drivers stated calmly over the radio. "There will be no deviation from the schedule." "Excellent," Naruto said, "but still the barrier in front is there." The 5 remaining Crimson Dreadnoughts were screaming down the highway, right at them, totally blocking all lanes. They were playing a giant game of chicken at 100 miles an hour. Asterisk, Commander. Sandy Cheek's voice shrieked through the underground hookup. Asterisk. You can't employ the gravity plating against a head-on collision at that speed. The kinetic shockwave will tear the condiment payloads within the trailers. I know, Chief Engineer, Naruto said. I'm going outside to clear the lane. Naruto leaned forward and smacked the big, blazing green button on the dashboard. Automated cruise control. Engage. Naruto unbuckled his safety strap. He booted the hefty armored door of the cab. The roaring desert wind, 100 miles per hour, hit the cabin all at once. Naruto climbed up onto the running board. His square brown slacks and pristine red tie flapped furiously in the gale, but his silent stalkers held the metal precisely. Maintain velocity, Naruto directed the convoy. Don't stop. Naruto stepped up onto the roof of his huge black semi-truck. He stood up straight and tall, peering down the roadway at the 5 sovereign dreadnoughts coming toward him. They were 3 seconds from a catastrophic head-on crash. Naruto turned his tactical attention. He figured total approach speed, 200 miles per hour. He tapped his arm gauntlet. Gravity, 0.1 gigaseconds. Naruto felt almost weightless. He bent his legs and sprang straight up, hurling himself into the screaming air above the freeway. He was a bright yellow missile shooting over the space between the clashing convoys. He was right behind the lead sovereign truck. Gravity, 15.0 gigaseconds. In a split second, the weightlessness of Naruto's body turned into an apocalyptic solidity. He plummeted like a solid, hyper-compressed iron meteor. Boom. Naruto landed right on the engine block of the lead sovereign dreadnought. His artificially dense bulk had a sheer, overpowering kinetic force that instantaneously squashed the entire front part of the vehicle flat against the tarmac. The rear trailer threw its front up into the air and turned end over end. Naruto didn't hesitate. His shoes hit the crushing metal and he decreased his gravity to 0.1 g, leaping sideways to the next truck. Leap. 15.0 gigaseconds. Crush. Crush. Leap. 15.0 gigaseconds. It was the Raijin on wheels. Naruto skipped from hood to hood. A scary, stuttering flurry of yellow velocity and deadly gravity fluctuations. In precisely 1.8 seconds, all 5 of the forward sovereign dreadnoughts had their engine blocks crushed completely into the tarmac. The cars came to a dead halt, crashing forcefully and skidding to a stop in the desert sand on either side of the road. With one more leap, Naruto took the momentum to curve back flawlessly towards his own convoy. He decreased his gravity to the normal 1.0 g and landed perfectly back on the roof of his lead Leviathan-class transport as it burst through the burning gap created by the demolished terrestrial barricade. Naruto stood on the roof of the lorry as it rolled along, glancing back at the flaming wreckage of the corporate hit squad. "The highway is clear," Naruto stated deadpan into his lapel mic. Sovereign Burger's land-based logistics have been decisively outfoxed. "Boss, I'm getting their telemetry." Plankton's chuckle, the frenzied typing noise reverberating across the comms. Asterisk the corporate mercenary crawls out of the wreckage. No injuries, but their pride and their vehicles are utterly destroyed. The ground barrier has broken. Asterisk Naruto stepped back down into the cab and took the wheel, disconnecting the autopilot. They relied on sheer mass and intimidation. Naruto whispered to himself, fixing his white paper hat. Density is just a variable you can play around with, but they don't understand that. The 10 black semis roared on, leaving the smoking remnants of the corporate ambush far behind them. The sun was gone completely from the sky, and the Mojave Desert was in total blackness. For 2 hours the sole illumination was the blinding brightness of the Syndicate Vanguard headlights cutting through the night. Then a glimmer rose on the horizon. It wasn't the sun's fault. It was a huge, sweeping, false radiance that filled the desert sky with bright, violent colors. Neon pinks, electrifying blues and blazing golds. Naruto watched the terrestrial city rise out of the arid floor. It was a huge monument to excess, to impetuous behavior and unfettered capitalism. Huge pyramids, fake Eiffel Towers and giant hotels flanked a never-ending stretch of asphalt. Plankton. "Confirm visual," Naruto said. "Visual, boss, asterisk." "Plankton," said a deep megalomaniacal awe that entered his little voice. Asterisk. "You have arrived to the terrestrial coordinates. Las Vegas, Nevada, the endgame snare for the human consumer." Asterisk. "The architecture is very inefficient," Naruto said, his eyes unblinking, taking in the chaotic skyline of the strip. "But the population density and their psychological predisposition to dopamine-driven consumption is mathematically ideal." Naruto was on the steering wheel. "Node Epsilon drivers, get ready for urban infiltration," Naruto ordered. "We are not opening one restaurant in this sector. The entire boulevard will be annexed. Welcome to Node Eta." The 10 fully armored, stealth black semi-trucks pulled off the freeway and descended on the neon oasis like a pack of wolves. The Earth expansion had survived the fire, and the Grease warlord was preparing to invade the desert. Las Vegas Boulevard was a monument of earthly incompetence. It was a wide, chaotic canyon of flashing neon, artificial volcanoes, and replica monuments designed solely to keep distracted individuals away from their liquid capital. For the typical tourist, it was a playground. Naruto Uzumaki saw it as a particularly vulnerable target environment based on obsolete psychological algorithms. The 10 matte black Leviathan-class transports sped down the Las Vegas Strip in perfect, terrifying coordination. They disregarded the flow of traffic. They drove 5 abreast, dominating the multi-lane avenue. Taxis, luxury limousines, and sports vehicles swerved across the sidewalks to avoid the Conch Street Syndicate's rumbling, armored convoy. Naruto Uzumaki inspected the gambling resorts from the lead cab. The terrestrial strategy in this sector relies on the concept of the comped meal, he explained to his 9 drivers. The casinos serve high-calorie, low-quality food at buffet stations to ensure that customers never leave the gambling floor. We will break this cycle. They're trapping the capital inside the buildings, boss, Plankton announced over the subterranean connection. If the gamblers don't leave the casino, they can't buy our burgers. Then we will extract the gamblers, Naruto said. He tapped the dashboard console. Node Epsilon drivers. Naruto ordered, break formation and carry out the dispersion protocol. Target the main gateways of the 10 largest resorts. The 10 big black trucks suddenly separated. They moved over the tarmac with the lethal, synchronized precision of a shinobi attack team, hopping the curbs and parking directly in front of the ornate, fountain-lined entryways of the Strip's most famous casinos. Naruto led his lead Leviathan up the immaculate marble driveway of the Bellagio. He slammed the air brakes. The enormous car came to a standstill just in front of the glass double doors, fully blocking the valet queue. He triggered the deployment sequence. The trailer's strong armored side hissed and withdrew, showing a shining stainless steel serving window measuring 20 feet. The automated exhaust vents activated, directing the heavy, thermal-infused, savory perfume of the Syndicate Gold into the resort's air intake systems. Naruto moved up to the grill. Deploy the bait, he ordered. Inside the casino, it was Tuesday night. The floor was filled. Vincent Sterling, the resort's cruel billionaire owner, stood on the second-floor mezzanine, surveying his kingdom. Thousands of people were pulling levers, rolling dice, and gradually losing their mortgages. The free cocktails were flowing. The casino's basic logic was faultless. Then the scent entered the ventilation system. It seemed subtle at first. A tinge of deep-sea salt. A surge of pulverized kelp umami. A mild, peppery heat that went via the olfactory nerves and attacked the human dopamine receptors like a tactical strike. A woman stopped mid-pull on a high-stakes slot machine. She sniffed the air. Her eyes widened. At a neighboring craps table, a man holding a stack of $100 chips spilled them unexpectedly. Someone murmured, "Where's that smell coming from?" as his stomach growled violently. Within 90 seconds, the chemical hook of the unique viscosity had infected the whole casino floor. The gamblers didn't just get hungry, they felt an overwhelming biological desire. They abandoned the slot machines. They walked away from current blackjack hands. They left stacks of chips unsecured on the green felt. A vast, zombified mob of visitors and high rollers began to shuffle toward the front doors, drawn solely by the aroma of the syndicate. Up on the mezzanine, Vincent Sterling watched in horror as his casino floor, his flawlessly built money printing machine, emptied in less than 3 minutes. The only sound remaining in the huge ballroom was the electronic jingle of abandoned slot machines. "What the hell is going on?" Sterling yelled at his chief of security. "Where are they going?" "Sir," screamed a furious pit supervisor, racing up the steps. "There is a black semi-truck parked in the valet circle. It is selling hamburgers. The whole hotel is queued up outside. They're trading casino chips for dipping sauce." Sterling's face became purple with aristocratic wrath. He was a terrestrial shark. Nobody bled on his floor. "Get my security detail," Sterling hissed, striding towards the elevator. "We are going to dismantle a food truck." Outside, the intake velocity was incredible. Naruto Uzumaki's hands were a bright blur. Consumers in Las Vegas threw casino chips, cash, and Rolex watches through the window. Naruto received all terrestrial assets and slipped precisely built Krabby Patties and ramekins of Syndicate Gold down the counter. "Hey, you." The casino's huge glass doors burst open. Vincent Sterling walked out, accompanied by 6 enormous, fitted security guards wearing earpieces and bulging suit jackets. The swarm of hooked tourists dispersed like the Red Sea, scared of the casino owner. Sterling marched right up to the serving window of the Leviathan transport. He glared at the yellow sponge. "I don't know what kind of stunt Sovereign Burger is pulling, but you have exactly 10 seconds to pack up this circus tent and get off my property," Sterling yelled, pointing at Naruto. "You're poaching my players. If you don't go, my guys will rip you out of that suit and beat you on the pavement." Naruto Uzumaki didn't stop flipping the patties. Naruto turned to face the billionaire with unblinking blue eyes. "Your consumers have voluntarily chosen a superior product," he said in a deadpan tone. "I'm not poaching. I provide market optimization. If you want to initiate a transaction, you can join the line at the rear." Sterling gave a dark, vicious laugh. "You think you're smart, mascot?" Sterling scoffed and leaned against the stainless steel counter. "This is Vegas. We do not have corporate wars here. We have rules. The house always wins. I will make you a deal." Sterling took a large, solid gold casino chip from his pocket and slapped it on the counter. "We settle this like gentlemen," Sterling said, his eyes filled with the predatory confidence of a man who dominated the city. "A single spin of the roulette wheel in my own VIP area. High stakes. If you win, I will hand over the food and beverage distribution rights for the whole casino to your small business. But if I win, you give me the keys to this truck, the recipe for that sauce, and never return to Nevada." Plankton moaned over the radio from the subterranean bunker thousands of miles distant. "Boss. Do not do it. Terrestrial casinos manipulate their high-stakes tables." Naruto whispered into his lapel mic. "A mathematical trap is only effective against a target that adheres to standard probability." Naruto examined the gold chip. He stared at the casino manager. He reached down, untied his apron, and neatly placed it over the grill. Naruto stated, "I accept your terms," while adjusting his crimson tie. He walked out of the armored truck's back door, leaving his silent stalkers on the marble driveway. "Lead the way, Vincent." Sterling sneered. The fool had accepted the bait. 10 minutes later, the ultra-exclusive VIP lounge's thick oak doors were sealed shut. The room was empty save for Sterling, his 6 guards, the private roulette dealer, and the yellow fry cook. Naruto was standing across the green felt table from the billionaire. Sterling remarked, "The wager is set," while the hydrosuit silently hummed. "One spin. You call the number." The dealer, a highly trained Sterling employee, scooped up the ivory ball. Naruto deadpanned, 00, while he waited for the call. Sterling smiled. The odds were the longest on the board. It didn't matter what the sponge chose since Sterling had a small, electromagnetic trigger hidden in his shoe that interacted with a magnet within the roulette wheel. Sterling directed the ball to be spun into any specified slot. The dealer twisted the polished mahogany wheel, flicking the ivory ball in the opposite direction. Clatter, clatter, clatter. The ball bounced quickly through the rotating grooves. As it lost pace, Sterling carefully pushed his toe on the trigger in his shoe, activating the magnetic beneath the number red 14. The ball started to drop precisely towards the 14. Naruto Uzumaki's azure gaze followed the dynamic course. He recognized the unusual magnetic pull right away. It was a primitive, terrestrial genjutsu. Naruto placed his yellow, 4-fingered hand flat against the roulette table's wooden edge. He did not employ the spatula kata. He employed a confined, microscopic application of the density principle. Gravity is 15.0 gigaseconds. Naruto's gravitational density pushed his hand into the table for precisely 0.01 seconds. The table did not break, but a microseismic kinetic shockwave traveled through the wood and into the roulette wheel's metal mechanics. The shockwave struck the electromagnet just as the ball was going to drop into red 14. The massive gravitational disruption entirely wrecked the magnetic field. The ivory ball fiercely ricocheted off the edge of the 14 slot, launching itself into the air and landing dead center in the green slot. 00. The wheel came to a halt. The room was filled with a suffocating, total quiet. The dealer stared at the ball, his jaw agape. Vincent Sterling's smug smile faded completely. He pressed his toe against the trigger in his shoe. Nothing occurred. Sterling's cheeks paled when he realized the rigged game's physics had been breached. The ball defied the... He paused before admitting to the magnet. Naruto Uzumaki cautiously slid his hand away from the table. He stood precisely upright with his hands behind his back. "The probability matrix has resolved in my favor," Naruto declared, his squeaky voice tinged with the icy, absolute authority of the warlord of Greece. The house does not win when it plays against the architect of the supply chain. Naruto dug into his square pocket and drew out a freshly printed legal contract that Plankton had created during the elevator journey up. Naruto instructed the recipient to sign over the Golden Oasis culinary distribution rights as he slipped it across the green felt. You'll destroy the buffet. My transports will now be the sole food providers for your gamblers. The Conch Street Syndicate has officially annexed this resort. Sterling looked at the deal. He looked at his 6 huge security men, who were staring at the sponge in unsettling quiet. The billionaire had been duped. Not by sleight of hand, but by a creature with scary, unbreakable control over reality itself. Vincent Sterling, frightened, signed the contract using a gold pen from his jacket. Naruto stated, the neon choke point is secured, while taking up the document. He turned and strolled out of the VIP area, his silent stalkers making no noise on the luxurious carpet. He had defeated the terrestrial mercenaries, circumvented the military, and had recently bankrupted the family. The Las Vegas Strip belonged to the syndicate, and the march eastward would continue until the entire continent was drenched in amber glaze. The light was coming up over the Rocky Mountains, long jagged shadows falling across the Interstate 70. CEO Richard Sovereign had not slept in 3 days in the Chicago headquarters of Sovereign Burger. The Vegas annexation has caused turmoil on the world stock market. Sovereign Burger's stock was plummeting. Richard was in his mahogany boardroom, dimly lit. Across from him sat the director of the Terrestrial Food and Drug Administration, an anxious, balding man clutching a leather briefcase. I can't just send in the military to bomb a food truck, Richard, the FDA director muttered, wiping the sweat from his brow. The Pentagon already had them listed as a civilian organization. If we hit them on US soil, it's a federal crime. They are not a civilian group. They are a syndicate, Richard Sovereign growled, his silver hair tousled. He pushed a hefty, bound file across the table. Our chemists labored all night long. Check out the mass spec on their amber-colored dipping sauce. It binds to the dopamine receptors with an effectiveness of 99%. It doesn't just taste delicious. It rewires the brain of the Earth chemically. Director file was opened. His eyes grew big. This molecular structure is totally foreign. It's quite addictive. It replicates the neurological characteristics of a Schedule 1 narcotic. Precisely, Richard smirked, a chilly predatory grin. It's not a condiment, it's a biohazard. I want you to make Syndicate Gold an illegal, highly hazardous synthetic narcotic. If it's a drug, the military can't look the other way. The DIA and National Guard will have complete jurisdiction to capture the convoy before it reaches the Rockies. The FDA director swallowed hard. He grabbed out a pen and signed the emergency authorization form. In an hour, the terrestrial classification was complete. The Conch Street Syndicate was no longer running an illegal eatery. They were officially labeled the deadliest narco syndicate on the planet. The 10 matte black Leviathan-class transports rumbled eastward, high in the perilous, serpentine passes of the Colorado Rocky Mountains. Naruto Uzumaki sat in the cab of the lead truck, blue eyes unblinking as the big vehicle took a steep, slippery turn. Commander, we've got a situation Delta coming up, asterisk. Sheldon J. Plankton's voice buzzed over the dashboard comms. Karen just picked up a huge terrestrial data burst. The human government just classified our proprietary viscosity as an illegal narcotic. Asterisk. The classification is technically incorrect, but strategically predictable, Naruto analyzed effortlessly. They can't compete on the flavor profile, so they criminalize it. Identify the near tactical threat. They've got a big, well-fortified biochemical checkpoint set up at the Eisenhower Tunnel, 10 miles ahead of your position, Plankton said. This time it ain't simply barricades, boss. They've got chemical sniffers, hazmat teams, and sonic acoustic disruptors to break our axles if we try to ram through. They're waiting for you. Naruto didn't flinch. He kept a constant 75 miles an hour across the mountain pass. A rupture of our trailers will cause a localized hazardous material spill, computed Naruto. We need a mental breakdown. We have to take out the terrestrial guards, without setting off their alarm systems. He punched up a secure channel on his comms array. Chief Engineer, is the heavy ordnance operative ready for ground deployment? Beneath the Pacific Ocean, Sandy Cheeks was wiping a streak of grease off her air helmet and standing confidently in the level 2 dojo. "He's ready, boss," Sandy beamed. Plankton engineered a custom high-capacity hydro suit. He appears precisely the same, but he's carrying a localized ocean of hydration. "I'm putting him in the pneumatic umbilical now. Launching the payload to the surface." Naruto nodded. "Calculate the trajectory. I want him put down right at the ground checkpoint." At the entrance to the Eisenhower Tunnel, the land blockade was complete. Behind solid blast barricades stood 50 heavily armed DIA officers in full tactical gear and chemical hazard suits. Automated chemical sniffer planes analyzed the alpine air. Sonic cannons trained straight down the highway. The terrestrial commander, a grizzled veteran known only as Agent Vance, surveyed the deserted road through his binoculars. "Hold steady, team," Vance commanded over the radio. "The cartel's caravan is coming. Keep the trucks out of the tunnel." Then there was a whistling high-pitched sound from the sky. Vance glanced up. A bright pink, star-shaped object fired from the oceanic umbilical in a suborbital arc plunged from the upper stratosphere. It didn't deploy a chute. It just dropped with the heavy, untroubled momentum of a monster with no self-preservation instincts whatsoever. Thump. The object struck the tarmac directly in front of the DIA barricades, splitting the pavement. Dust clouded in the air. Agent Vance raised his assault rifle, the laser sight cutting through the dust cloud. "Hold your fire. Locate the payload." The dust settled. The terrestrial agents looked. Total, mind-bending perplexity. There was a huge, pink starfish in the crater. He was wearing only a pair of lime-green flowery shorts. His hydrosuit buzzed invisibly, knitted perfectly into his porous flesh. Patrick Star blinked his big, lifeless eyes. He gazed at the 50 armed federal agents. He gazed at the sonic guns. "Is this the line for the bathroom?" Patrick asked, his deep voice rumbling down the mountainside. Agent Vance eased his weapon down a fraction of an inch. What is this thing? Alien." Naruto's deadpan, squeaky voice crackled over a small receiver embedded in Patrick's ear canal. "Agent Star. You're hot," Naruto ordered from the approaching Leviathan transport. "Initiate Wumbo Protocol. Phase 2. Patrick's face slowly stretched into a terrifyingly blank smile. He didn't draw his weapon. He didn't take a fighting stance. He just kept on walking, his hefty shoes pounding on the asphalt. He walked right past the concrete barricades and up to Agent Vance. "Sir. Stop," Vance cried, backing away, weapon raised. "Identify yourself." Patrick looked straight into Vance's eyes. It was as if the starfish was staring at the absolute, unsearchable void of space. "The inner workings of my mind are a puzzle," Patrick mumbled. Vance stopped. His tactical training went to pieces. What? Know your cargo. Are you carrying the synthetic narcotic?" Patrick cocked his head. "Is mayonnaise a narcotic?" "No. Mayonnaise is a condiment," Vance snapped, his heart pounding as he sought to get the interrogation back on track. "Where are the trucks?" "Not a narcotic, then, is horseradish," Patrick said firmly, folding his pink arms. "I didn't ask about horseradish," Vance roared, his blood pressure rising. The agents around him looked at each other in fear, not knowing how to respond to the creature. "I Wumbo," Patrick said, his voice low and philosophical. "You're Wumbo. He, she, me, Wumbo." The personal mental hazard was starting to kick in. The starfish was broadcasting weaponized idiocy, and it was eating away at the terrestrial agents' hold on reality. Humans are wired to look for logic, patterns and threats. Patrick gave none of these. He was a human paradox of physics and common sense. "Stop using that word," Vance screamed, holding his head as a monstrous migraine bloomed behind his eyes. "What does it mean? What are you doing here?" "I'm here," Patrick answered, leaning so close his breath fogged Vance's tactical visor, "because the lid on my jar is stuck. And the ugly barnacle might use some help." Suddenly a junior DIA agent in the back of the line dropped his rifle and sat on the pavement. The agent cried. "He is right. The barnacle was so awful, everyone died." "Snap out of it, Miller," Vance screamed, stumbling backwards. "It is a psychological weapon. Don't mind it." But it was too late. Patrick dug into his flowered shorts and took out a perfectly normal, earthly pebble. He raised it up to the sky like a holy relic. These babies are the wheels the pioneers used to travel miles, Patrick said with gravity. The psychological conflict increased to perilous levels. Agent Vance's knees went weak. The logic areas of his brain just shut down totally in an attempt to save him from the sheer, overpowering absurdity of the experience. He went down on the ground and looked blankly at the rock with his mouth slightly open. All terrestrial obstruction had been neurologically pacified within 3 minutes. 50 heavily armed federal agents sat on the asphalt, totally catatonic, calmly talking about the nuances of wombology and the aerodynamic qualities of pebbles. A deep heavy rumble came from the mountain pass. The 10 matte black Leviathan-class transports crested the hill, their thermal pulse engines purring. The first vehicle came to a rest right beside the crater. The passenger door opened. Agent Star. Hostile perimeter neutralized. Naruto's deadpan voice came down from the cab. Your cognitive hazard deployment was perfect. Get on the boat. Patrick returned his rock to his pocket. Mission achieved. Commander SpongeBob. Did we find the bathroom? Negative. We're heading into the Midwest distribution section, Naruto said, his blue eyes searching the drooling, catatonic DIA agents. The terrestrial authorities have been thrown down. Patrick clambered into the huge armored cab and slammed the door shut behind him. The 10 black trucks roared straight into the open Eisenhower Tunnel, leaving behind the silent sonic guns and unmanned chemical sniffers. The Rocky Mountains had come down. The Conch Street Syndicate was now invading the terrestrial heartland for real, and there was nothing left between the warlord of Greece and the city of Chicago. Patrick's Wumbo protocol strikes again. Ground blockage is completely torn down. The caravan currently is racing for the Midwest. The Chicago skyline appeared as a fortress of steel and glass against the cloudy morning sky. Inside the penthouse boardroom of the Sovereign Burger Tower, the atmosphere had shifted from corporate fear to existential dread. CEO Richard Sovereign looked at the large digital tracking map. The Conch Street Syndicate's Leviathan-class transports, shown by 10 black dots, continued beyond the Rocky Mountains. They had not slowed down on the Great Plains. They were going straight down Interstate 290 when they crossed the Chicago city boundaries. The DIA blockade failed, Richard said quietly, his tailored suit crumpled and his silver hair untidy. How does a federal blockade fail without firing a single shot? Sir, his chief of security mumbled, focusing on the live feed. The local police are reluctant to intervene. The mayor's office is completely locked out of their own municipal mainframe. The city's infrastructure has been hijacked. On the streets of the Loop, Chicago was experiencing a perfectly planned, cyber-engineered path of least resistance. Sheldon J. Plankton laughed uncontrollably in the subterranean Level 1 command center beneath the Pacific Ocean. His small green hands slid across his wet keyboard. I own the grid, boss. Plankton cackled over the encrypted communication uplink. Traffic lights? It's all green. Drawbridges across the Chicago River. Lowered and locked. I even redirected the terrestrial commuter trains to clear the junctions. You have a crimson carpet vector leading directly to their headquarters' front doors. Naruto Uzumaki drove with mechanical perfection in the lead Leviathan transport cab. Your cyber warfare deployment is acceptable, Plankton, Naruto deadpanned. Note Epsilon drivers, prepare for the last urban insertion. Our target is the Sovereign Tower. The 10 matte black, fully armored semi-trucks drove into Chicago's financial center. The earthly inhabitants paused on the walkways, putting their smartphones up to capture the horrifying, militarized caravan passing through their city with complete impunity. Richard Sovereign viewed the lobby camera feeds. Lock it down, Richard yelled, spitting. Drop the blast doors, arm the private security detail. Nobody breaks into the lobby. The Sovereign Tower's glass entrance was covered with reinforced titanium security shutters. 50 private, heavily armed corporate guards took defensive positions behind marble pillars. Outside, 10 Leviathan transports arrived. They did not park nicely. The 10 gigantic trucks moved with synchronized, scary precision onto the plaza, forming a perfect circle around the base of the building. They built an impregnable, armored wall of black steel. The siege was set. The air brakes hissed simultaneously. The hefty steel door to the lead cab opened. Naruto Uzumaki stepped onto the terrestrial concrete. He adjusted the clean white paper cap. Patrick Starr climbed down from the passenger seat, pulling up his lime green flowery shorts. He was clutching a half-eaten hot dog that he had purchased from a puzzled street vendor 3 blocks away. "Agent Star," Naruto said gently. "Set up perimeter defense. No terrestrial entity may enter or exit this barricade until the corporate capitulation is signed." "You got it, Commander SpongeBob." Patrick saluted, dropping the hot dog and reaching into his pocket for his tactical terrestrial rock. He stood at attention, staring intently at a neighboring fire hydrant. Naruto approached the shuttered titanium shutters of the Sovereign Tower. Inside the lobby, security guards leveled their assault guns at the blast doors, anticipating an explosive charge or ram. Instead, there was simply one repetitive sound. Naruto used his spatula's wooden handle to lightly touch the thick titanium shutter. He was calculating structural resonance. He identified the exact core of the metallurgical stress matrix. He grabbed the spatula. He did not engage the masses. He simply imparted localized kinetic torque to the wooden blade. Spatula Kata, one finger-piercing strike. Naruto pushed the wooden spatula directly forward. Krang shatter. The 6-inch thick titanium blast door imploded rather than merely denting. The metal folded backward like a crushed soda can, ripping off its huge hydraulic hinges and slamming into the lobby's marble floor with a thunderous roar. Dust and smoke rose into the air. The 50-armed security guards froze with shaky fingers on their triggers. A bright yellow, completely rectangular thing moved quietly through the dust to the foyer. His silent stalkers produced no sound. His hands remained neatly folded behind his back. "You are currently defending a bankrupt asset," Naruto's squeaky, deadpan voice resonated throughout the huge foyer. As of 0800 hours this morning, the global stock worth of Sovereign Burger had plunged by 92%. Your employer can no longer afford to pay your wages. Lower your weapons. The chief of security swallowed hard. He examined the smashed titanium door. He checked his radio earpiece, which was currently relaying panicked messages from the accounting department verifying the complete collapse of their stock. The head of security lowered his firearm. He unclipped his radio and allowed it to fall to the marble floor. The remaining 49 guards parted like the Red Sea, letting the warlord of Greece pass. Naruto strolled by them without a second thought. He approached the executive elevator bank. The doors slid open instantaneously. Plankton had already hijacked the building's internal program. Naruto stepped inside. He pressed the penthouse button. The elevator music, a gentle, terrestrial jazz melody, played slowly as Naruto ascended 100 stories. He stood completely still, his blue eyes unblinking, and the hydro suit hummed softly beneath his clean white shirt. Ding! The elevator doors opened to the penthouse boardroom. Richard Sovereign occupied the far end of the large mahogany table. He was holding a big silver pistol and aimed it directly at the yellow fry cook. "Stay right there," Richard yelled, his corporate composure completely shaken. "I don't care what you are. I don't care about your localized gravity. If you take another step, I will empty this cylinder." Naruto stepped out of the elevator. Naruto assessed gently, terrestrial ballistics are the last resort of a tactician who has exhausted his leverage. He did not approach him. He just reached into his square pocket. He took out a perfectly sealed 2-ounce foil ramekin of syndicate gold. He threw it underhanded. It slid across the polished mahogany table, stopping precisely 1 inch from Richard Sovereign's trembling hand. "Look at your city, Richard," Naruto said flatly. Richard's gaze shifted to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Tens of thousands of human consumers crowded the plaza below, past the ring of black semi-trucks. They were not rioting. They chanted. They were waving money. They demanded the amber glaze. "Your conglomerate relied on aggressive marketing and cheap terrestrial meat to maintain a monopoly," Naruto stated, chilling the air in the boardroom. "But you neglected to reinvent the most important variable in the culinary equation: chemical dependency. My proprietary viscosity has altered the terrestrial palate. They don't want your hamburgers. They just want my sauce." Richard gazed down at the small foil cup. The wonderful, umami-rich fragrance was slowly slipping through the seal. Even he, a rich CEO, experienced an involuntary, primordial flow of saliva in his mouth. "What do you want?" Richard muttered, carefully lowering the gun till it clattered uselessly on the table. "You've destroyed my inventory. You have surrounded my building. What is left?" Naruto approached the broken CEO and stopped across the table. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a large, formal document, setting it flat on the board. Naruto indicated that a pre-existing terrestrial distribution network is required to expedite Phase 13, global expansion. Sovereign Burger has 40,000 international outlets. I'm performing a hostile corporate buyout. Richard screamed, 30 cents on the terrestrial dollar. Do you want to buy my entire global franchise network? You can't simply consume Sovereign Burger? I'm not digesting it. I'm repurposing it, Naruto explained calmly. Your terrestrial kitchens will be devastated. The signs will be replaced. Every area on the Earth will be rebranded as a Conch Street Syndicate node. You will sign the deed, Richard, or you will declare bankruptcy by Friday, and I will buy your vacant buildings at auction for pennies. This was the ultimate checkmate. The warlord had cornered the king. Richard Sovereign reviewed the deal. He stared at the yellow sponge, whose unblinking, terrifyingly adept eyes had predicted every single variable, countered every single attack, and optimized every single supply line. No terrestrial entity could stop him. Richard Sovereign sighed heavily and signed his conglomerate with a fountain pen from his suit pocket. Naruto Uzumaki took over the contract. He folded it carefully and returned it to his square pocket. Your capitulation is accepted, Naruto said softly. Vacate the premises by 1700 hours. Naruto walked away from the earthly CEO and toward the floor-to-ceiling window. He peered out over the enormous, massive human city of Chicago, as well as the entire North American continent. He tapped the lapel microphone. Command. The terrestrial monopoly is absolute. The global buyout is complete, Naruto announced, his squeaky voice finally allowing a sliver of profound tactical joy to seep through. Thousands of miles away, at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, the Level 1 command center erupted in thunderous cheers. Plankton was crying tears of megalomaniacal joy, while Sandy Cheeks was hurling her designs across the air. We did it, boss, Sandy's voice cracked, filled with wonder. The oceanic sector, the beachhead, the mainland. You own the entire supply chain. Naruto adjusted his crimson tie. His silent stalkers stood solidly on the pinnacle of the earthly business world. He started with a rusty spatula and squeaking shoes. He'd militarized the logistics. He had outmaneuvered the gods. And he had demonstrated indisputably that true shinobi power did not originate from chakra. The free market's faultless efficiency led to this outcome. Stay tuned for more. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this video. I'm thrilled you watched the video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe for even more exciting content coming your way soon.